The polished mahogany of the conference table felt like a coffin lid, and Leo felt as though he were being buried beneath it. Across from him, Isabella, his wife of 10 years, soon to be his ex-wife, smiled a smile so sharp it could have cut glass. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. Her lawyer, a man with a face like a well-fed shark, slid a final document toward him. The last page, the final nail. "Just your signature here, Leo," the lawyer purred, tapping a manicured finger on the line. "And we can all move on with our lives." Isabella leaned forward, the scent of her expensive perfume, a scent he once associated with home, now smelling of ash and estrangement. "Don't look so grim, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a cloying false sympathy that was more insulting than any curse. "Think of this as a new beginning. For both of us." Leo said nothing. His silence had always been a source of immense frustration for her, a blank wall against which she could hurl her ambitions and her disappointments. Today, it was his only shield. He picked up the heavy gold-plated fountain pen the lawyer had provided. It felt absurdly weighty in his hand, a prop in a drama he had never auditioned for. "I've tried to be fair, Leo. Truly, I have," Isabella continued, her gaze sweeping over him, a quick dismissive inventory of his worn but clean tweed jacket, his simple watch, the quiet dignity that she had always mistaken for weakness. "The house is mine, of course. It was my family's money that secured it. The art, the investments, well, you never understood that world anyway. I'm taking what I built." What we built, Leo thought, but the correction died on his lips. There was no we anymore. There was only her, resplendent in her victory, and him, the quiet footnote to her life story. "I am, however, leaving you something," she announced, a grand flourish in her tone. Her lawyer shifted, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. This was not in the script. Isabella reached into her designer handbag and produced a single, old, rust-stained key tied with a piece of faded twine. She slid it across the table. It screeched faintly against the polished wood, a discordant sound in the hushed, expensive room. "Your grandfather's old workshop," she said, her lips curling in a pitying smirk. "That dreadful, dilapidated shack on the industrial estate. I was going to have it demolished. It's an eyesore and practically worthless. But then I thought of you. A place for your little hobbies, your little drawings." She let the words hang in the air, each one a carefully crafted insult. Little. The word she had used to diminish every dream he ever had, every project he'd ever poured his soul into. "Since you could never build a real career, perhaps you can build a birdhouse or two. Stay busy." Her brother, Marcus, who sat beside her as a silent show of family force, had the decency to look away, a faint flush of shame coloring his neck. He, at least, had once seen the blueprints Leo drafted late into the night. He knew they were for more than just birdhouses. But Marcus's loyalty, like everything else in the Beaumont family, was a commodity, traded for approval and a seat at the table. Leo looked at the key. It was heavy, iron, from a time when things were built to last. He saw the workshop in his mind's eye, the smell of sawdust and old oil, the shafts of dusty light cutting through the grimy windows, the sturdy oak workbench his grandfather had built with his own hands. It was the only place he'd ever felt truly himself, the only place Isabella's relentless ambition could not reach. She thought she was leaving him with a ruin, a monument to his failure. She thought she was delivering a final, crushing humiliation. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the deed to that workshop was tied to a secret his grandfather had buried in paper and ink more than 60 years ago. A secret sleeping in a dusty ledger in the city archives. She believed she was leaving him with a pile of bricks and rotting wood. She had no idea she was handing him the keys to the kingdom. Within 6 months, that forgotten key would unlock a fortune she couldn't possibly comprehend, and the name she had worked so hard to discard would be the one whispered with awe in the very circles she longed to dominate. Leo looked up from the key, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time in a long time, his eyes held no pain, no resignation. They held a calm, quiet, devastating certainty. He picked up the pen. But before we see him sign that paper, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated, written off, or told your dreams were too small? If you have, you're in the right place. Give this video a like to show you're ready for a story of vindication. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to the moment everything changed. Leo's signature was a steady, deliberate stroke. He capped the pen, placed it neatly beside the document, and rose from his chair. He did not offer a hand to shake. He did not say goodbye. He simply took the old iron key, its cold weight a comforting promise in his palm, and walked out of the room, leaving the scent of victory and expensive perfume behind him. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind him was the most satisfying sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage opening. The burial was over. The resurrection was about to begin. The first days of Leo's new life were defined by a profound and cleansing emptiness. The cavernous, architect-designed house he had shared with Isabella was replaced by a small, one-bedroom apartment above a quiet bookstore. The air no longer carried the faint, oppressive scent of her lilies and ambition. Instead, it smelled of old paper and coffee. He owned 3 plates, 2 forks, a single perfect armchair, and a drafting table that took up most of the living room. He had never felt richer. He spent the first week not in mourning, but in a quiet, methodical purge. He shed the last vestiges of his life as Isabella Beaumont's husband. The tailored suits she'd insisted he buy, which always felt like a costume, were donated. The expensive, minimalist furniture they'd owned, which offered no comfort, was a memory. He was stripping his life down to its foundations, to the structural truths that had been obscured by years of decorative compromise. He was an architect, after all. He understood the importance of a solid foundation. Meanwhile, the Beaumont family celebrated. Isabella hosted a lavish divorce party at her parents' sprawling estate. It was, of course, framed as a celebration of her newfound freedom. Photos flooded social media. Isabella laughing, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by a coterie of equally wealthy and predatory friends. Her father, Richard Beaumont, the patriarch of the family and CEO of Beaumont Corp., a titan of commercial real estate development, stood beside her, his arm protectively around his daughter. The caption on one photo posted by Marcus read, "To new horizons and cutting dead weight. So proud of my sister for choosing her own happiness." Leo saw the post. A friend, with well-meaning but misguided concern, had sent him a screenshot. He looked at the smiling faces, the casual cruelty of the caption. He felt a flicker of something. Not anger, not sadness, but a distant, analytical curiosity. They were so certain in their judgment, so insulated by their wealth, that they couldn't conceive of a world where their pronouncements were not final. They saw him as dead weight, a failed project to be discarded. They had no idea he was the bedrock on which they unknowingly stood. On the 10th day of his new life, he went to the workshop. It was located in a forgotten corner of the city, a sprawling, low-rise district of old brick warehouses and forgotten factories known as the Ironwood Quarter. It was a part of the city the Beaumonts and their kind flew over on their way to the airport, a place they considered urban blight, ripe for demolition. The building stood exactly as he remembered. A 2-story brick structure with large, multi-paned windows clouded with decades of grime. A faded sign, barely legible, read, "Blackwood and Sons, Fine Carpentry and Cabinetry." His grandfather, Arthur Blackwood, had been more than a carpenter. He was a master craftsman, an artist who worked in wood the way a sculptor worked in stone. Leo unlocked the heavy padlock on the door. The iron key turned with a groan of protest, the sound of long-disused machinery stirring to life. The door swung open and he was hit by a wave of memory. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, turpentine, and something else, the faint metallic smell of cold iron. Dust motes danced like fairies in the beams of light slanting down from the high windows. The ground floor was a vast, open space, dominated by the massive oak workbench. Old tools hung in neat rows on the walls, their steel surfaces protected by a thin film of oil, waiting patiently. In the corner, covered by a canvas dropcloth, was his grandfather's old lathe, a beautiful, beastly machine of cast iron and polished steel. It was a cathedral of forgotten industry. Isabella had seen a ruin. Leo saw potential. He saw the clean lines, the honest materials, the soaring vertical space. He ran a hand over the workbench, its surface scarred and stained with the history of 1,000 projects. This place had integrity. It was built with purpose, not for show. He went to the small, cramped office at the back. It was a time capsule. A rotary phone sat on the desk. A calendar from 1982 was tacked to the wall. He knelt and pulled a heavy metal footlocker from beneath the desk. The hinges squealed as he opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were his grandfather's treasures. Not gold or jewels, but something far more valuable. He carefully unwrapped a thick bundle of documents. There were blueprints, hand-drawn in India ink on vellum, so detailed they were works of art. They showed not just the workshop, but intricate plans for furniture, staircases, even a proposal for a public park. Beneath them were the deeds. He unrolled the first one. The deed for the workshop, Lot 17, Ironwood Quarter. His name, Leo Vance, was clearly listed as the sole heir and owner, the transfer officially filed by his grandfather's estate lawyer years ago. But this was not the secret. The secret lay in the second, much thicker roll of documents. It was a master deed, a complex legal instrument his grandfather, a man with only an 8th-grade education but a mind like a steel trap, had devised with an old, clever lawyer. During the economic downturn of the 1950s, when businesses in the Ironwood Quarter were failing, Arthur Blackwood had done something no one knew about. Using his modest savings, he hadn't just bought his own building. He had quietly bought the debt, the mortgages, and ultimately the deeds to 12 other properties surrounding his own. He acquired the old textile mill, the abandoned ironworks, the row of brick storehouses. He didn't tell anyone. He simply held them, paying the minimal taxes year after year, seeing them not as a path to wealth, but as a duty to preserve the soul of the district he loved. And buried deep in the legal jargon of the master deed was the artisan's covenant. It was a clause of pure, simple genius. It stipulated that the 12 properties were legally bound together. No single property could be significantly altered, rezoned, or demolished without the unanimous consent of the owners of the other 11. And since Arthur, and now Leo, owned all 12, he held an absolute, unbreakable veto over the entire block. He owned the heart of the Ironwood Quarter. Leo sat back on his heels, the musty papers spread before him on the dusty floor. He could hear Isabella's voice in his head, dripping with scorn. A place for your little hobbies. She had no idea. Richard Beaumont had no idea. They were about to launch the biggest development project in their company's history, and they were marching straight into a fortress they didn't even know existed. A fortress to which Isabella herself had just handed him the key. The months that followed the divorce settled into a rhythm of starkly contrasting realities. For Isabella and the Beaumont family, it was a season of ascent. Their world glittered. Isabella, untethered from the perceived anchor of her unambitious husband, blossomed in the circles she had always coveted. She was photographed at gallery openings, charity galas, and polo matches, always with a new, impeccably credentialed man on her arm. Her social media was a curated masterpiece of effortless glamour and cascading success. The crown jewel of this new era was the formal announcement of Beaumont Corp's magnum opus, the Beaumont Gateway. It was Richard Beaumont's legacy project, a breathtakingly ambitious multi-billion-dollar development designed to transform the city's blighted industrial sector into a gleaming hub of luxury condos, high-end retail, and corporate headquarters. Glossy renderings appeared in all the major financial publications. They showed sleek towers of glass and steel piercing the sky, manicured green spaces where old warehouses once stood, and a sparkling waterfront promenade. At the heart of the published map, circled in red, was the Ironwood Quarter. "We are not just building structures, we are building the future of this city," Richard Beaumont declared at a press conference, his daughter Isabella and son Marcus standing proudly behind him. "It's about sweeping away the decay of the past to make way for the prosperity of tomorrow." For Leo, those same months were a period of quiet, intense, and invisible labor. His world was one of dust, ink, and archives. While Isabella was being photographed in couture, Leo was in the city planning office, poring over zoning maps and historical records that hadn't been touched in half a century. While Richard was wooing investors in corporate boardrooms, Leo was on his hands and knees in the workshop, sanding back the original hardwood floors, revealing the rich, deep grain of 100-year-old maple. He worked with a methodical patience that bordered on monastic. He wasn't just planning a countermove, he was building a case. He hired a structural engineer to assess the old buildings, confirming what his architect's eye already knew. They were immensely sound, built with a quality of materials and craftsmanship that was now prohibitively expensive. He commissioned a historian to document the significance of the Ironwood Quarter, unearthing stories of the artisans and immigrants who had built this part of the city with their bare hands. Every nail he pulled, every beam he reinforced, every document he unearthed was another stone in the foundation of his fortress. He was not just restoring a building, he was restoring a legacy. He discovered that his grandfather's artisan's covenant was even more powerful than he'd realized. It was an ironclad historical preservation clause, written before the city had formal preservation laws, that gave him, the heir, the right to protect the fundamental artisanal and industrial character of the properties. It was a legal work of art. His life was a study in contrasts. By day, he wore work boots and clothes dusted with plaster, his hands calloused from labor. By night, he sat at his drafting table in his small apartment, the space illuminated by the glow of his lamp, sketching. But he wasn't sketching birdhouses. He was drafting a vision that was the antithesis of the Beaumont Gateway. Where they saw a blank slate for generic glass towers, he saw a vibrant, human-scale community. He envisioned the old warehouses converted into loft apartments and artist studios. The textile mill would become a bustling marketplace with artisanal food stalls and craft breweries. The ironworks would be a spectacular public art gallery. His plan preserved every historic brick, every steel truss, weaving the past into a living, breathing future. He called it the Ironwood Artisans' Quarter. It was brilliant, and it remained a complete secret. His only contact with the Beaumonts came in the form of a crisp, impersonal letter from Beaumont Corp's legal department. It was a formal offer to purchase Lot 17 for a sum that was insultingly low, barely covering the land value and treating the historic workshop as a liability to be demolished. It was a standard predatory offer sent to all the small landowners in the area, designed to be accepted out of ignorance or intimidation. Leo read the letter, a faint smile touching his lips. He didn't respond with an angry phone call or a desperate plea. He simply handed it to the quiet, ferociously intelligent lawyer he had hired, a woman who specialized in historical property rights. She drafted a polite one-sentence reply. "Thank you for your offer regarding the property at Lot 17, Ironwood Quarter. At this time, my client is not interested in selling." That was all. The quiet refusal was a pebble tossed into the Beaumonts' vast, placid lake of certainty. They wouldn't even feel the ripple. Not yet. They were too busy admiring their own reflections. They had mistaken his silence for surrender, his patience for paralysis. The arrogance of the powerful is a blindness of its own making, and Leo was content to remain in the shadows, sharpening his tools, while they celebrated in a sunlit world, completely unaware of the eclipse that was coming. The first sign of trouble for the Beaumonts arrived in the form of a junior associate from their legal team, a young man named Peterson whose suit was more expensive than his experience. He was dispatched to the Ironwood Quarter with a briefcase full of condescension and a slightly improved, though still paltry, offer for the workshop. He found Leo on a scaffold, meticulously repointing the brickwork on the building's facade. "Mr. Vance?" Peterson called up, squinting in the afternoon sun. He took in Leo's work clothes, the smudges of mortar on his face, and his expression settled into one of smug superiority. He was dealing with a common laborer, a handyman clinging to a worthless pile of bricks. This would be easy. Leo descended the scaffold, wiping his hands on a rag. He met the young lawyer's gaze with a calm, unnerving steadiness. "I have a new offer for you from Beaumont Corp.," Peterson began, opening his briefcase with a flourish. "They're prepared to be very generous, considering the state of this place. This is really more of a gesture of goodwill to clear the area for progress." Leo took the offered document, but didn't look at it. "Progress?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Tell me, Mr. Peterson, what is your definition of progress?" The question caught the lawyer off guard. "Well, development. Growth. The Beaumont Gateway is a multi-billion-dollar project that will create thousands of jobs, revitalize this entire area." He gestured vaguely at the surrounding warehouses as if shooing away a fly. "Revitalize it by tearing it down," Leo stated. It wasn't a question. "You see blight. I see history. You see vacant lots. I see a community that was." Peterson's professional smile tightened. "Look, Mr. Vance, let's not get philosophical. This is a business transaction. This is the final offer. If you refuse, Beaumont Corp. will have no choice but to pursue other avenues. Eminent domain is a powerful tool." It was a threat wrapped in legal jargon. "Is it?" Leo replied, his voice still infuriatingly calm. He handed the document back to Peterson. "Please inform your superiors that the answer is still no, and you might advise them to do a more thorough title search next time. Have a good day, Mr. Peterson." He turned and climbed back up the scaffold, the conversation for him being definitively over. Peterson stood there for a moment, nonplussed, the document in his hand feeling suddenly flimsy. A thorough title search? What was that supposed to mean? He chalked it up to the pathetic bluff of a man with nothing to lose. He reported back to Marcus Beaumont, who oversaw the land acquisition division of the project. Marcus, sitting in his sleek 40-floor office with its panoramic city views, laughed when he heard the story. "A title search? The nerve," Marcus chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "He's trying to squeeze us for a few extra grand. The failed architect thinks he's a real estate mogul. Don't worry about it, Peterson. We'll just start the eminent domain proceedings. Let's see how his philosophy holds up against a court order." But the pebble had been tossed. The first ripple was spreading. The eminent domain filing was met with a swift, surgically precise legal challenge from Leo's lawyer. The challenge cited obscure municipal codes and, more importantly, a pre-existing private covenant that superseded the city's claim. The Beaumonts' legal team was annoyed, then confused. A private covenant? On that worthless block? While the lawyers untangled that unexpected knot, Leo made his next move. He arranged a meeting. The location was not a corporate boardroom, but the second floor of his restored workshop, which he had converted into a stunning, light-filled architectural studio. The old wood floors gleamed. The exposed brick walls were adorned with his own breathtakingly detailed drawings of the artisan's quarter. His guest arrived precisely on time. He was an elderly, impeccably dressed man with eyes that had seen and judged half a century of architecture. This was Alistair Sterling, the most influential architectural critic and historical preservationist in the country. His word could make or break a project. A single column from him could sway city councils and turn public opinion into a tidal wave. Leo had not reached out to him for help. He had invited him to see a vision. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for coming," Leo said, shaking his hand. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Vance," Sterling replied, his sharp eyes already scanning the space, taking in every detail. "Your letter was intriguing. You have a passion for these old buildings." "I believe they're not just old. They're timeless," Leo said. He led Sterling to the center of the room, where a large, meticulously crafted scale model of his proposed artisan's quarter sat on a table. For the next hour, Leo spoke. He didn't speak of his divorce, of the insults, of the Beaumonts. He spoke of his grandfather. He spoke of craftsmanship, of community, of sustainable development that honored the past. He walked Sterling through his vision, building by building, explaining how the district's industrial soul could be reborn. He wasn't just presenting a project. He was telling a story. Sterling listened, silent and intense. He circled the model, bending down to examine the miniature courtyards, the rooftop gardens, the way the new structures respectfully conversed with the old. He picked up one of Leo's hand-drawn elevations, studying the fine line work. When Leo finished, the room was quiet. Sterling stood looking out the large window, down at the real ironwood quarter below. "They want to tear all this down," Sterling said, his voice a low rumble, "and replace it with more of the same soulless glass boxes that are turning our cities into generic airports." He turned back to Leo, and for the first time, a genuine smile lit up his face. "Mr. Vance, what you have here is not just a counter-proposal. It is a masterpiece. It's a work of restorative genius. It's the kind of project I have spent my entire life fighting for." He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You are not alone in this fight anymore. Let's show them what real progress looks like." The alliance was forged. The student of the master craftsman had found his champion, and the Beaumonts, celebrating their imminent victory, had no idea that a king had just been moved to the other side of the board. The Beaumonts' frustration was beginning to curdle into genuine anger. The unexpected legal challenges from Leo's corner were more than just a nuisance. They were causing delays, and in the world of multi-billion-dollar development, time was a commodity more precious than steel. Investors were asking questions. City council members who had been promised a smooth and rapid process were growing impatient. The source of this immense headache was, impossibly, Leo, the quiet, unassuming man they had so casually discarded. Richard Beaumont, a man accustomed to bulldozing obstacles, whether they were zoning laws or people, was incensed. "Who is this lawyer he's hired?" he bellowed at Marcus during a tense meeting. "How is one man in a derelict shack holding up the biggest project in this city's history?" Marcus, feeling the pressure of his father's wrath, had no good answers. "His lawyer is good, Dad. She's an expert in preservation law, and she keeps referencing this artisan's covenant in her filings. Our team is trying to find a loophole, but it's unusually well drafted." airtight, one of them said. It was Isabella who proposed the new strategy. She had been watching the proceedings with a mixture of disbelief and a growing, unfamiliar sense of unease. Her narrative of Leo as a failed, pitiable man was beginning to fray at the edges. She couldn't reconcile the man she thought she knew with the person capable of orchestrating this kind of sophisticated resistance. She concluded it couldn't be him. He must be a pawn, put up to this by some rival developer. Or perhaps it was simply emotional. He was hurt, and he was lashing out in the only way he could. "He's being sentimental," she announced to her father and brother. "This isn't about business for him. It's personal. Legal threats will only make him dig his heels in. We need to handle this as a family." Her father looked at her intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" "Let me talk to him," she said, her confidence returning. "He was my husband. I know how he thinks. He's lonely and bitter. Invite him to dinner at the house. We'll sit him down, all of us. We won't threaten him. We'll be compassionate. We'll show him the future we're building, and we'll offer him a place in it. A small place, of course. A way for him to save face." The plan was quintessentially Beaumont, a maneuver of soft power, designed to look like generosity while being an act of absolute dominance. The trap was set. Isabella made the call herself. Her voice on the phone was a carefully modulated blend of warmth and concern she hadn't used with him in years. "Leo, it's me. I've been worried about you. This whole legal situation, it's all so unnecessary. Dad and Marcus want to fix this, and so do I. Can you come to the house for dinner on Friday, for old time's sake? Let's just talk. No lawyers." Leo, on the other end of the line, stood in his sunlit studio, looking at the scale model of his artisan's quarter. He knew exactly what this was. It was the final summons. The command performance where the recalcitrant subject would be brought before the throne and given one last chance to bend the knee. He could hear the condescension humming beneath her practiced sincerity. "All right, Isabella," he said, his voice even. "I'll be there." On Friday evening, Leo drove his modest 10-year-old car to the Beaumont estate, the grand mansion he had once called home. The gates swung open, and he proceeded up the long, manicured driveway. The house was ablaze with light, designed to impress, to intimidate. It looked to his architect's eye like a monument to insecurity. He was shown into the formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Richard sat at the head, a king in his court. Isabella and Marcus were arranged on either side. The scene was perfectly staged, an execution disguised as a dinner party. The meal was an exercise in theatrical condescension. They spoke of their recent European holidays, of art auctions, of the soaring success of Beaumont Corp. They did not ask Leo a single question about his own life. They simply talked at him, weaving a tapestry of their own importance, designed to make him feel small and insignificant. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Richard leaned forward, his performance beginning. "Leo," he started, his voice a low, paternal rumble, "we're family, and what you're doing, it's hurting this family. You're standing in the way of something magnificent." Marcus unrolled a set of glossy architectural renderings across the table. They depicted the Beaumont Gateway in all its sterile glory. "Look at this, Leo," Marcus said, his tone earnest. "This is a legacy. This is the future. That whole district will be reborn." Isabella placed her hand gently on his arm. It was a gesture he knew well, the precursor to a demand. "We know you're attached to your grandfather's workshop," she said softly. "It's understandable. But you have to let go of the past. We want to help you. We've put together a new offer." She slid a folder across the table. "We're prepared to triple our last offer. It's more than the property will ever be worth. And, she added as if bestowing a great honor, Dad has agreed to offer you a position at the firm, a junior designer role. You can be part of this, Leo. You can finally have the career you always wanted. It's more than you deserve, but we're doing this because we still care. There it was. The offer, the charity, the final crushing insult, dressed up as an act of grace. They had laid all their cards on the table, confident they held a winning hand. Leo looked at their faces one by one. Richard, smug and powerful. Marcus, a weak echo of his father. Isabella, her face a mask of compassionate superiority. They were so sure of themselves, so blind. He let the silence stretch, filling the grand room. He looked down at their glossy pictures of a future that would never be. Then, slowly, he reached down into his own simple leather satchel, which he had placed on the floor beside him. He pulled out a single, old, leather-bound folder. It was worn at the edges, the leather soft with age. It was his grandfather's. He placed it on the table. The quiet, solid thud it made seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The trap had been sprung, but they were about to discover they were not the hunters. They were the prey. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The Beaumonts' confident, theatrical magnanimity faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. They stared at the old leather folder as if it were a strange, alien object. Leo placed his hands flat on the table, a relic of the past, and they were people who believed the past was something to be demolished. Leo placed his hands flat on the table, a gesture of calm, grounded authority. He had spent months in silence, absorbing their condescension, their pity, their dismissal. The silence was over. "Thank you for the dinner," he began, his voice quiet but carrying a new and unfamiliar resonance. It was not the voice of the man they thought they had invited here. "And thank you for the generous offer." He paused, letting the irony settle. "But I'm afraid you've all been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding." Richard Beaumont bristled. "A misunderstanding? Let me be clear, Leo. This isn't a negotiation. This is a final act of goodwill before we crush you in court." Leo's gaze met his father-in-law's without flinching. "You can't crush what you don't understand, Richard. You've been trying to buy one building, Lot 17. He opened the old folder. The paper inside was brittle with age. He slid the first document across the table. It was a deed, yellowed and bearing the elegant looping script of a bygone era. "This is the deed to the old textile mill on the north side of the block." He slid out another. "This is for the ironworks at the center." Another. "The row of 6 storehouses along the canal." He continued one by one, laying out a fan of deeds like a winning hand in a high-stakes card game. Marcus's face went pale as he recognized the lot numbers. They were the key strategic properties in their acquisition plan, the ones they had marked as pending negotiation or in legal proceedings. "I don't understand," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible. "How?" "My grandfather," Leo said simply, his voice filled with a profound respect that silenced the room. "He was a craftsman. He understood that you build things to last, not just out of wood and brick, but out of paper and law. When others saw a dying district in the 1950s, he saw a legacy worth preserving. He bought them, all of them, quietly, and he left them to me." He let that revelation sink in. The Beaumonts were stunned, their minds racing to calculate the financial implications. But Leo wasn't finished. The quiet bomb was yet to be detonated. "You see, you think this is about money. You think I'm holding out for a bigger price. But you're wrong. This is about principle, and my grandfather was a man of principle." He tapped the thickest document, the master deed that bound them all together. This is what your lawyers, in their haste, failed to properly investigate. They saw a footnote and dismissed it. It's called the Artisan's Covenant. It legally binds these 12 properties into a single, indivisible trust. And it contains a clause, a beautiful, simple, unbreakable clause, that states no single part of this trust can be demolished or rezoned for non-artisanal commercial purposes without the unanimous written consent of the owner. He looked up, his eyes locking with Richard's. And I am the owner. I am the trust. I hold the veto. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world turned upside down. The Beaumonts' multi-billion-dollar project, their legacy, the entire future of their company, rested on the whim of the one man they had deemed worthless. Their grand vision of glass and steel was held hostage by a 60-year-old piece of paper, and the quiet man they had thrown away. Their project is impossible without my consent, Leo stated, the words landing like hammer blows. And my consent will never be given. Richard's face was a mask of purple fury. You can't do this. We'll sue you. We'll tie you up in court for the rest of your life. You're welcome to try, Leo said, his calmness a stark contrast to Richard's sputtering rage. My lawyer seems to think the covenant is one of the most legally sound preservation documents she has ever seen. But this isn't just about stopping you. He reached back into his satchel and pulled out a second, modern portfolio. He opened it, spreading his own set of drawings and renderings across the table, covering their vision of the future with his own. The breathtaking human-scale beauty of the Ironwood Artisans' Quarter silenced them again. This, Leo said, his voice now filled with the passion he had suppressed for so long, is the real future of that district. A place that honors its past while building a new community. A place for artists, for families, for small businesses. A place that serves the city, not just its wealthiest investors. He looked directly at Isabella, whose face was a canvas of shock and dawning horror. You told me I could never build anything real. You were wrong. I've been building this for years. In my head. On paper. And now, I'm going to build it in brick and steel. He slid one final piece of paper across the table. It was a letter bearing an official letterhead. And I'm not doing it alone. You might be interested to know that last week, thanks to a petition sponsored by the Alistair Sterling Foundation, the city's Historical Preservation Committee granted landmark status to 5 of the buildings in the quarter, including the textile mill and the ironworks. Demolition is now officially off the table. Your project, Richard, is dead. The carefully constructed world of the Beaumont family had just been leveled to the ground. The man they had cast out of their kingdom had just revealed that he owned the land on which their castle was built, and he had just set it on fire. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of disbelief. Richard Beaumont, a man who had commanded boardrooms and city councils with the force of his personality for 40 years, was rendered speechless. He stared at the documents, then at Leo, his mind unable to bridge the chasm between the son-in-law he had dismissed as a failure and the strategic mastermind sitting before him. The gears of his powerful brain ground to a halt, choked by the impossible reality of his defeat. Marcus was a statue of pure dread. As the head of acquisitions, this was his failure, his catastrophic, career-ending failure. He was the one who had assured his father that the land was clear, that the small-time holdouts were a trifle to be swept aside. He had seen the covenant. He remembered it now. A brief, archaic-looking clause in a preliminary title report. He had dismissed it as irrelevant, a historical curiosity. In his arrogance, he hadn't bothered to understand it. The weight of that oversight was now crushing him. Isabella was the most transparent of all. Her shock quickly morphed into a desperate, grasping attempt to reclaim control. The mask of compassion fell away, revealing the raw, panicked ambition beneath. "Leo, what do you want?" she demanded, her voice sharp, frantic. "Money? Is that it? Fine. Name your price. A partnership? Dad, we can make him a partner. A full partner." Leo looked at her, and for the first time he felt not pain or anger but a profound pity. She still didn't get it. She thought everything, even principles, had a price tag. "It's too late for that, Isabella," he said calmly. "This was never about a partnership with you. This is about a partnership with the past, with my grandfather's vision." Richard finally found his voice, a venomous growl. "You will regret this. I built this city. I will tear you down, Vance. I will bury you in legal fees. I will ruin you." Leo began to calmly gather his drawings, his grandfather's deeds, placing them back into their respective folders. He acted not with the triumphant swagger of a victor, but with the quiet efficiency of someone who has concluded a business meeting. This lack of emotional display seemed to infuriate them even more. "You're welcome to try, Richard," Leo repeated, his voice even. "But you should know that Mr. Sterling and his foundation are not just my partners in vision. They are my partners in finance and law. Their legal team is, I believe, considerably larger than yours. And public opinion, when they learn you tried to demolish a historic landmark district to build more luxury condos for the 1%, well, I don't think it will be on your side." He had anticipated every move, planned for every contingency. He had not come here to fight. He had come here to announce the war was already over. He stood up, his chair making a soft, scraping sound on the hardwood floor. "I will be presenting my consortium's official proposal to the City Planning Commission next month. It details our plan to acquire the remaining properties in the district, including the parcels currently held by Beaumont Corp. At fair market value." He looked at Marcus. "I'm sure your investors will be pleased to recoup some of their money before your stock plummets." He then laid out his final devastating terms. "You have two choices. You can sell your holdings to my consortium now and walk away. Or you can hold on to your useless land, trapped by a covenant you cannot break, and watch while we build a thriving community all around you. Your choice." Isabella jumped to her feet, her composure completely gone. "You can't do this to us. After everything we did for you, we gave you a life you could never have dreamed of." Leo paused at the door, turning to face her one last time. The pity he felt was now tinged with a deep, weary sadness. "You gave me a beautiful house, Isabella. You gave me expensive clothes, but you never gave me respect. You took my dreams and called them hobbies. You took my passion and called it failure. You didn't give me a life. You asked me to be a decorative object in yours." He looked at the three of them, a family united in their avarice and now shattered by their arrogance. "You thought I was the dead weight. But it seems you were the ones who couldn't see the foundation you were standing on." With that, he walked out of the dining room, out of the opulent mansion, and out of their lives for good. He left behind him not just a dead business deal, but the smoking ruins of a dynasty. The silence he left in his wake was heavier and more profound than any shouting match. It was the sound of an empire falling. The fallout was swift and brutal. Leo's words were not idle threats. They were prophecies. The moment news broke of the Ironwood Quarter's landmark status and the existence of the Artisans' Covenant, the financial world reacted with cold, efficient cruelty. Beaumont Corp's stock, which had been soaring on the promise of the Gateway project, nosedived. Investors, smelling a disaster, began to pull out, a trickle that quickly became a flood. The multi-billion-dollar project evaporated into a multi-billion-dollar liability. The Beaumont family home, once a bastion of power and influence, became a pressure cooker of blame and recrimination. Richard, his legacy in tatters, unleashed a torrent of rage upon his son. He accused Marcus of incompetence, of laziness, of single-handedly destroying the company his grandfather had built. The verbal abuse was relentless, stripping away the last vestiges of Marcus's confidence, leaving him a hollowed-out shell of a man. Isabella, meanwhile, found her own world collapsing. Her new partner, a hedge fund manager whose attraction to her was directly proportional to her family's net worth, grew distant. Their conversations became strained. He stopped inviting her to his exclusive social events. Her currency in their world, the Beaumont name and fortune, had been devalued overnight. She was no longer a prize to be won, but a potential liability. Within a month, he was gone, ending their relationship with a curt, impersonal text message. Her desperation led her to confront Marcus in his office, the same office where he had once laughed at Leo's defiance. She found him staring blankly at a screen showing the catastrophic decline of their company's stock. "You have to fix this," she shrieked, her voice thin and ragged. "You were in charge of acquisitions. How did you miss this? How could you be so stupid?" Marcus finally snapped. The years of being his father's underling and his sister's enabler boiled over in a wave of bitter resentment. "Me, quiet loser, you were embarrassed to quiet loser. You were embarrassed to introduce to your friends. We didn't do a deep dive on his property because we didn't think he was smart enough to own a toaster, let alone an entire city block. This isn't my failure, Isabella. This is our failure. Our arrogance. We did this to ourselves." The argument was vicious, severing the final threads of their sibling alliance. The family was imploding, consumed by the very poison of hubris they had so freely administered to others. Amidst this chaos, Marcus made a decision. He knew that anger and blame were useless. The empire was gone. His father would never forgive him. His sister despised him. He had only one desperate path forward. He had to face the man he had wronged. He went to the Ironwood Quarter. He found Leo not in an office, but on the floor of the old textile mill, surrounded by a team of young architects, sketching out plans on a massive roll of paper. The energy in the space was electric, creative, hopeful, collaborative. It was the complete opposite of the toxic, fear-driven atmosphere at Beaumont Corp. Leo looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. He excused himself from his team and walked over to Marcus, his expression unreadable. Entire life witnessed a more profound and inadequate. So, he spoke the truth. "I have never, in my entire life, witnessed a more profound and deserved victory," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "And I have never felt more ashamed of my own conduct." He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for pity. He owned his part in it completely. "I was a coward. I went along with it because it was easier than standing up to Dad and Isabella. I saw your talent, and I let them mock it. I dismissed the covenant because I dismissed you. There is no excuse for it." Leo listened, his gaze steady. He was testing him, searching for the sincerity behind the words. "I'm ruined, Leo," Marcus continued, a bitter honesty in his voice. "My father will never trust me again. The company is finished. I have nothing." He took a deep breath. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm here to make an offer. I know corporate finance. I know project management. I know the side of this business that you've never had to deal with. Let me work for you. For free, if you want. Let me use what I know to help you build this. Let me do it as penance." It was the ultimate reversal. The prince of a fallen kingdom, begging for a job from the man he had cast out. Leo considered him for a long moment. He saw the desperation, but he also saw a flicker of something else. A broken man, genuinely seeking a chance to rebuild, not his fortune, but his character, "The pay isn't great," Leo said finally. "And you'll answer to my project manager. You'll start at the bottom." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes. It was more than he had hoped for. It was a chance. "Thank you, Leo," he whispered. "Thank you." Leo had not sought revenge, but justice had a way of finding its own balance. For Marcus, justice was not destruction, but a difficult, humbling path toward redemption. 6 months later, the Ironwood Quarter was the most talked-about urban renewal project in the nation. The transformation was astonishing. The sounds of demolition had been replaced by the careful, respectful sounds of restoration. Skilled masons were repointing century-old brickwork, glaziers were fitting new panes into vast, arched windows, and local artisans were forging new steel railings in designs that echoed the district's industrial past. The artisans' quarter was rising, not by erasing history, but by celebrating it. Leo Vance was no longer an unknown. He was the visionary architect at the heart of it all. Feature articles appeared in architectural magazines and major newspapers. They praised his integrity, his commitment to sustainable design, and his genius for weaving the old with the new. He was lauded as a hero of urban preservation. Yet, through it all, he remained unchanged. He was still the quiet, thoughtful man who preferred the company of craftsmen to investors. He wore the same simple clothes, drove the same modest car, and found his greatest joy in seeing his blueprints come to life. He had kept his word to Marcus. Marcus Beaumont, former executive of a corporate giant, was now a mid-level project coordinator. He worked long hours, his expensive suits replaced by a hard hat and a high-visibility vest. He was humbled, but he was also, for the first time in his life, engaged in work he found meaningful. He was part of creating something beautiful, not just profitable. His relationship with Leo was professional, respectful, and distant, but it was built on a foundation of hard-won truth. He was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding his integrity. The consequences for Richard and Isabella were a mirror image of Leo's ascent. Richard Beaumont was forced into a disgraced retirement. Beaumont Corp. Was dismantled, its assets sold off for pennies on the dollar to cover its massive debts. The Beaumont Gateway became a cautionary tale taught in business schools, a classic example of hubris leading to ruin. Richard now lived in a much smaller house, a bitter, broken man who spent his days railing against the man who had outmaneuvered him. He had lost not just his company, but his identity. Isabella's fall was perhaps the most poetic. Without the shield of her family's wealth and status, her glittering social world dissolved. The friends who had toasted her freedom now avoided her calls. She was forced to sell the grand mansion, the art, the designer clothes, all the trappings of a life she believed she had earned. She ended up in a small, generic apartment in a respectable but unremarkable suburb. It was clean, it was safe, and it was crushingly mediocre. It was a life she had always feared more than anything else. One evening, sitting alone in her beige living room, surrounded by furniture from a chain store, she scrolled through a news article on her phone. It featured a picture of Leo, standing in the magnificent, restored central hall of the old ironworks, now a stunning public gallery. He was smiling a small, genuine smile, surrounded by his team. He looked grounded, confident, and happy. He looked like the man she had once, long ago, fallen in love with, before her ambition had poisoned everything. Her fingers hovered over his number in her phone. What would she say? "I'm sorry? I was wrong." The words felt hollow, insufficient to bridge the chasm of her own making. She thought of the final, cutting remark she had made, offering him the workshop for his little hobbies. The memory burned with a shame so intense it was physical. She had handed him the instrument of her own destruction, wrapped in a bow of her own condescension. With a trembling finger, she deleted the contact. Some chasms were too wide to cross, some apologies were too late to matter. The late afternoon sun, the color of warm honey, streamed through the magnificent arched window of the old workshop. The space was no longer a dusty relic, but a vibrant, living heart. The ground floor remained a high-end artisanal woodshop, a tribute to Arthur Blackwood, while the upper level served as the central office for the entire Ironwood Artisans' Quarter project. From this window, Leo could see his vision spreading out before him, cobblestone alleys bustling with people, the old mill alive with the chatter of a farmer's market, smoke curling from the chimney of a new bakery in one of the restored storehouses. Alistair Sterling stood beside him, his hands clasped behind his back. The old critic, who had seen thousands of buildings in his lifetime, never seemed to tire of the view. "Your grandfather would be proud, Leo," Sterling said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Not just of what you've built, but of how you've built it, with integrity, with respect." Leo nodded, a quiet gratitude filling him. "He gave me the tools," he said, "the blueprints, the deeds, but also the values. He always said, 'Measure twice, cut once.' I think he meant it for life, not just for woodworking." He thought of the Beaumonts. He had not set out to destroy them. He had only sought to build his own dream, to protect his grandfather's legacy. Their ruin was a byproduct, a consequence of the choices they had made long before he laid his grandfather's folder on their dining table. They had built their house on a foundation of arrogance and greed, and when the storm came, it had washed away. He had built his on the bedrock of history, integrity, and a quiet, unshakable belief in his own worth. His journey had not been one of revenge, but of reclamation. He had reclaimed his name, his passion, and his dignity. The world now saw him as a millionaire, a real estate mogul, a visionary. But in his own heart, he was still just the grandson of a carpenter, a man who liked to build things that last. The money was a tool, nothing more. The true wealth was in the creation, in the community taking root outside his window, in the quiet satisfaction of a dream honored and realized. He had learned that the strongest structures are not built of steel and glass, but of character. He had lost a wife, a home, a life he thought was his, and in their place, he had found himself. Isabella had taken everything from him, everything she considered to be of value, but she had left him the one thing she saw as worthless, and in doing so, had given him everything that truly mattered. The story of Leo teaches us a powerful lesson. It reminds us that true value is often hidden, overlooked by those who are blinded by superficial measures of success. It's a testament to the idea that patience, integrity, and a quiet belief in one's own vision can be more powerful than any amount of wealth or bluster. It's about understanding that the foundations our grandparents laid, whether of brick or of principle, are treasures to be protected. What do you think is the most important foundation in life? Is it wealth, family, integrity, or something else entirely? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective adds so much to our community, and if this story of quiet strength and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the hidden power within us all. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let anyone else define your worth.